Alright, so we're going to talk about absolute value functions and how to graph those absolute values. So we're going to start with the absolute value function, what it needs to look like. So it needs to be in this form. Y equals a absolute value of x minus h plus k. Now your vertex is always at h and k. Now k is your y, and that's going to stay the same. But your x is going to be the opposite of whatever your h is. So let's take a look at that. So the first thing that we're going to do, here we go. We've got y equals a absolute value of x minus h, absolute value plus k. A is what we call your multiplier. Now here our vertex is at 3 because our k doesn't change. And then the opposite of a positive 2 is a negative 2. So here we put our vertex at negative 2, positive 3. Now, how did I say it was going to go down and not up? It's because our multiplier is negative. Anytime you have a multiplier that is negative, it's going to go down. If this multiplier was a positive, it would go up. So now what I'm going to do is I've put my t-chart here, and it should be labeled x and y. Okay? So my x is 1. So I plugged in my my x points, which are x and negative 1. Now 1 squared is 1 and negative 1 squared is 1. And then I'm going to multiply both of these by your multiplier, which is a negative 1. Okay? And then over here, which is a negative 1. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start at my vertex, and the first point says to go over 1, so positive 1, down 1. Then here it says to go over negative 1, down negative 1. Then I just go ahead and graph my points, and you're done. So let's look at example number 2. Now example number 2 says negative 4, absolute value of x plus 2, absolute value plus 3. So let's go back. So here we've got 2, absolute value of x plus 4. Okay? So, we're going to look at example number 3 here. So 2, absolute value of x plus 4. Now, our vertex is at a negative 4, 0. So we don't have our k over here, so it's just 0. And then the opposite of h is a negative 4. So negative 4, 0. So I plugged 0, negative 4. That's where my vertex is. Now, we've got a 2 for our multiplier. Our multiplier is positive, so we know our graph is going to go up. So again, I started my t-chart. So I've got x and y. And I plugged in 1 and a negative 1. Now 1 squared is 1, negative 1 squared, so I have to square both of these. So squared is 1 and 1. Now our multiplier is 2, so we're going to multiply both of these by 2. So I multiplied by 2 and I multiplied this side by 2. And I've got 2 and 2. So I'm going to go over 1, up 2. So over 1, up 2. And then over a negative 1. So over a negative 1, up 2. And then we go ahead and plot our points. Now if you notice, the difference between this graph and this graph is much wider than this graph. And the bigger your multiplier is, the narrower your graph is going to be. So finally, let's look at our last example. So our fourth example is a negative x minus 2. So let's go look. So we've got negative square root of, absolute value of x minus 2. So my vertex is at 0, negative 2, because we don't have our x value. So 0, and then our y is a negative 2. Okay? So we went ahead and plugged that in for our vertex. So 0, negative 2. Then we've got our x and our y. Now we're going to start with, again, 1 and negative 1. 1 squared is a positive 1, and a negative 1 squared is 1. Now, our multiplier is a -1. Anytime we've got a multiplier of a negative, our graph is going to go down. So we're going to multiply this by a -1 and multiply here by a -1. So we're going to go over 1, down a -1. So over 1, down a -1, and over a -1, down a -1, over negative, down negative. And then we went ahead and plotted our points. So that is how we graph absolute value functions. Now, if you look at number 4 here, or example number 5, it says y equals a negative absolute value of x minus 4, absolute value plus 2. Now, our vertex is at 2, positive 4. So over 2, so it should be 4, positive 2. So 4 up a positive 2. Now, the question says, explain why the graph shown is or is not the graph of. So it's not the graph of because you should have gone x is 4, 2. And this is not. This is 4, -2, not 4, positive 2. So keep that in mind. Those little details really matter when you're going to graph absolute value functions.